On episode 275 of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Gretchen Rubin and discuss her book, The Four Tendencies. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/275. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness Podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Hello, and welcome to the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast. I am so glad you're here. Really looking forward to this interview today, but I'm also excited about a couple of little things I want to talk about. The first is I received a rating and review from Dwayne, and really appreciate the kind words, Dwayne. Really do appreciate what you said, and the fact that you really wish that I was doing more than one episode a week. I am going to give you a little gift for that, Dwayne. I do appreciate the podcast review, and I listen to you. So I am going to, for at least the next month, release a few extra episodes during the month. So you'll get one on Monday and Thursday. And I'll do that as long as I can continue to line up the guests and make sure that I have good, solid content for you. I'm not going to release an episode just for the sake of releasing one, but I will make sure that I release some extra episodes. So, Dwayne, look out on Thursday. If you're subscribed to the podcast, you'll definitely get those. So please do take a time to go out and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. I read each and every one of those, and I wouldn't want you to miss an episode, particularly today's episode. One more step before I get into that, though. I was released by my doctor, my PT, my physical therapist, to basically start doing some lifting. So I am going to start lifting weights again. Still can't do a lot with my upper body because my shoulder still isn't strong enough and there's a little bit of pain involved. But I am going to start working out, which is, I cannot tell you how much that means to me to be able to get back in the gym. I'm not happy with the way I feel right now. I need to be lifting weights regularly. I know that needs to be a part of my daily life. So glad to be getting back in the gym, and I appreciate all the well wishes that you guys have sent via email and through social media. So thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate it. So our guest today is the best-selling author, Gretchen Rubin, and she wrote one of the best books on happiness that's out there. And it's really kind of driven a movement. She has a podcast now. And this book we're going to talk about today, The Four Tendencies, really does an amazing job of giving you some insight into the way your mind works and the way other people's minds work. Now, as Gretchen wrote the book, most of the book is geared towards relationships and how knowing your different style, which your tendency is based on the four tendencies, how that'll affect you and relationships around you, which definitely we get into in this episode, because I'm one tendency and my wife is a different one. So understanding how she thinks is definitely going to make me a better husband. And as I start looking at other relationships in my life, it's going to help me better manage those relationships and do things the right way, whereas before I might have been turning people off with the way I approach things. So learned a lot from that. But beyond that, we kind of dive into how these tendencies affect your motivation. And so the more you understand about where you fit along that paradigm of the four tendencies, is we're going to help you stick to programs and get more done in your health and fitness journey. So I really am excited for this interview today. I know you're going to enjoy it. So with no further ado, here's Gretchen Rubin. So Gretchen, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
I'm so happy to be talking to you.
Well, as I told you in the lead-in when we were talking earlier, I am really excited to have you on the show. I've been following your work for quite some time, with your previous book, and then a colleague of mine had interviewed you for his podcast, and so I was like, okay, that's the kind of person I need. That's happy. That's what I need and want on my podcast as often as I can possibly have it. And your new book, The Four Tendencies, really does kind of strike a chord with me because it really kind of talks about. I know we talk about personality profiles, but I think in a lot of ways it'll give someone insights into why we make the decisions we make.
Yeah, no, that's exactly how I think people could get the most out of it, is like, what actually is going on with me and other people?
Yeah, because some people are just really, really confusing when you're like,
yes.
What's going through their mind? Don't they obviously know this is what they should be doing? And as you can tell the way I phrased that, I am a questioner.
Mm-hmm.
My profession is internal audit, so you would think I was a little bit more of an upholder, but I think I kind of fit in that little zone of I question a little bit more than I just go ahead and do.
Mm-hmm.
So while we're getting into this now, let's go through each of the four tendencies, kind of what they are, and how someone can generally understand where they stand on this.
Right. So most people can tell what they are and what the people around them are just from this brief description that I'll give. But there is a quiz if somebody wants to sort of take a quiz and get an answer at happiercast.com/quiz. So if you're dying to take a quiz, you can go to happiercast.com/quiz.
And that's actually where I took the quiz. I actually went on the website because I just found I was looking at the book and I was like, this might just be easier. And I can tell you, do go to that website because it just does make the questions that much easier. You kind of go through them. It tabulates everything for you. So it's a little bit easier if you have access to the website to do the quiz there. I felt anyway. So that's kind of how I approached it. And I got it on my wife's phone. I said, here, go take this because I want to confirm what I think. And it was. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's go through each of the four tendencies.
Okay. Yeah, so it has to do with how you respond to expectations. And we all face two kinds of expectations. Outer expectations, which are like a work deadline or a request from a friend. And inner expectations, which are things like a New Year's resolution or your own desire to get more into running. Now, there's upholders, questioners, obligers, and rebels. Upholders readily meet outer and inner expectations. They meet the work deadline. They keep the New Year's resolution without much fuss. They want to know what others expect from them, and they want to meet those expectations, but their expectations for themselves are just as important. Next, questioners. Questioners question all expectations. So they make everything an inner expectation. If it meets their standard for making good sense, they'll do it. If it doesn't meet their standard, they will resist. And they typically hate anything arbitrary or inefficient or unjustified. They always want to know why.
Or because that's the way we've always done it. So it just irks me to no end.
That is like the worst thing you could say to a questioner. Or because I say so, right? Which is why questioner children are so often get in trouble. Next, obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. And I got my insight into this when a friend said to me, I know I would be happier if I exercised. And the weird thing is when I was in high school, I was on the track team and I never missed track practice. So why can't I go running now? Well, she's an obliger. When she had a team and a coach expecting her, waiting for her, she had no trouble going. But when it's only her own desire to go for a run, she struggles. Then finally, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do in their own way, in their own time. If you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist. And typically, they don't even want to tell themselves what to do. Like, they don't want to sign up for a 10 a.m. yoga class because they're like, I don't know what I'm going to feel like doing at 10 a.m. on Saturday. And like, even the idea that somebody's thinking that I would go makes me crazy. I want to just do what I feel like when I wake up on Saturday. So these are the four tendencies. And one of the things that's interesting is they're not equally represented in the world. So obliger is the biggest tendency. You either are an obliger or you have many obligers in your life. They're the rock of the world and they're the biggest tendency. Right behind them, questioners, your tendency. A lot of people are questioners. The two kind of extreme personality types is rebel. That's a small group of people. It's a conspicuous tendency, but not that many people are rebels. And what was surprising to me as I was developing this framework is my tendency, the upholder tendency, is only slightly larger. And that was a huge revelation to me as I was going through this, is understanding I'm really kind of a fringe extreme personality. Not that many people are like me. And so many things became clearer to me when I understood, not that many people see the world the way that I do.
Yeah, because it's, in a sense, I would say you're very balanced because you're weighing both. You're weighing the external expectations and your own internal expectations and trying to make all of them happen.
Well, that is an excellent point, and that's something that a lot of people don't understand so quickly, which is that they think that an upholder would feel like the most pressure because they feel the weight of both outer and inner expectations, but it's not that way. That's not true for exactly the reason that you say. For an upholder, the commitments to themselves are just as important. And so they can say, sorry, I need to go for my run. Sorry, I need to go to sleep. Sorry, I can't do it for you because I got my own stuff that I have to do. I feel just as obligated to meet those expectations for myself. So you're right. It kind of helps them balance. It helps them preserve themselves.
Yeah. And while a rebel might come off kind of, I guess, a little selfish, in a sense, they're not even really focused a whole lot on what their own internal desires are until they just decide they want to go do something. So it's not so much a selfishness, it's just kind of a wiring to say, I don't want to commit.
This is a really, really interesting point. And because there is an aspect to rebels where they're going to do what they want to do. They're going to do what they choose to do. And the fact that you ask them to do it or tell them to do it or they have to do it or, it can be hard for other people to manage that, especially if they don't understand where the rebel perspective is. And so I think you're right. It can sort of be tough to deal with. Now, one of the things that's important to understand about the Four Tendencies is this is just one very narrow aspect of any one person's personality, any one person's nature. It's like this very tiny thing, your response to expectations. Now, it's very significant. It turns out this comes up a lot in life, but it's very narrow. So you could have 50 rebels lined up or 50 questioners, and depending on how ambitious they were, how considerate of other people's feelings they were, their values, how extroverted or introverted they were, how intellectual they were, how curious they were, how adventurous they were, how controlling they were, how neurotic they were. All these things, they would be all mixed up, and so they would look very different. But as to how they respond to expectations, they would be the same. So if you take a rebel who's very ambitious and very considerate of other people, that person's going to look very different from a rebel who isn't very considerate and isn't very ambitious, because they're both responding the same, where they're like, I'm going to do what I want to do, but what one person wants to do is going to be very different from what the other person wants to do. Yeah. But they're still doing it because that's what they want to do.
So kind of the way I looked at it is there's somewhat of a continuum within each of the realms. And so I, as a questioner, because of the nature of the type of work that I've always done, the way I feel about my family and whatnot, I tend to kind of veer a little bit more towards the upholder edge of my continuum, to say that, I'm more likely to put more value on what someone else needs on the basis of the way I question something. So if my daughter needs something or asks for something, I'm much more likely to just go ahead and say yes because it's her, versus just really question, is this something I really want to do? Which, I'd be more tendency to do for my boss, for example.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and I mean, because one of the reasons that that a questioner chooses that something makes sense to do is like it's important to somebody else. Like, I might think it's a really dumb thing to sit here and listen to you practice your recitation 50 times. I don't think this is a good use of my time or your time, but it's important to you that I do it, and so I'm going to do it because it makes sense to me to do what's important to you. Yeah. I'm married to a questioner, so I'm intimately familiar with this. And my husband, he's a great guy, and I have much more patience now with his questioning, because his question is always like, well, why should I? I literally called him to ask him his office address. What possible reason would I have to ask him such a boring bureaucratic question? And he's like, why do you want to know? Not because he's a jerk, but just because he's not going to even tell me something. It would take him less time to just tell me his office address than for us to have a conversation about it. But darned if he's going to tell me something if he doesn't understand why. And that's just, that's where the questioners are coming from. They want to know why.
Yeah. Now, and you kind of see, you solved something exactly. My wife was like, if you would put me on the phone bill, I could do things on the phone bill, like change plans and do all this other stuff. I'm like, well, why? I'm the one paying the phone bill. So, I'll just pick up the phone and call him and make the change. I'm basically responsible for the utility bills. So, I'll take care of it. It was easier than to not know what she had done. And then, now I come in and why was that way? And then change it back. And, we're basically doing
it's just more efficient. Yeah. It's more efficient.
Yeah, just trying to wrap my mind around it.
But then you can get into situations where the tendencies don't understand each other's perspective. So let's say you have an obliger married to a questioner. So an obliger,
which we do, which my wife is exactly that, which is, again, kind of the opposite paradigm, and kind of now understanding a lot of the conversations that we've had is she wants to help. And I'm like, well, this is the more efficient route. Just let me do it.
Yeah. And then also some ways where there can be frustrations among questioners and obligers, or even upholders and obligers, is like an obliger will say, like, well, it's really important to me to do this, but then they don't follow through because there's no outer accountability, because that's what obligers need. They need outer accountability even to meet inner expectations. And sort of questioners and upholders don't understand this, because they're like, if it's so important to you, just do it. It's like, if you really want to go for a run, start running again, do it. Or don't do it, and stop talking about it. But I don't understand why you keep talking about it and not following through. Or they might be unsympathetic to obligers. Like an obliger's like, oh, I went to these lengths to meet this expectation. And the questioner or the upholder might say, well, do it if you want, or don't do it. But, suit yourself. And the obliger's like, what? Like, why don't you appreciate that I went to this great length to meet this expectation? Whereas an upholder or questioner is like, well, if you didn't want to do it, like, why did you do it? I mean, like, they're like, I don't get it. And now I'm understanding, oh, this is the obliger. When we understand that where they're coming from, it's much easier to set things up. So that they don't feel resentful and taken advantage of or exploited, because they can sometimes because of that meeting the outer expectations.
And I think that's part of, my wife's paradigm is, she'll have two friends ask her to do something on the same day and she wants to say yes to both of them.
Right.
And I'm like, which one are you going to enjoy the most, or which one, whose turn is it, or, have some basis to understand why you want to make the decision you're going to make, or maybe you don't want to do either one of them, but don't feel like you have to do both of them. But she's gonna tear herself up to try to figure out how she can do both of them if she possibly could.
So here's the answer. This is the solution. This is like the critical piece for obligers. Whenever that comes up, whenever there's a difficulty meeting an inner expectation, which by definition, that is the definition of obligers, is they have trouble meeting inner expectations. The solution is always to plug in outer accountability. And there's a million ways to plug in outer accountability once you understand that that is the missing piece. So I would say you're arguing to her as a questioner. Find a heuristic. What is the most efficient thing? What's a fair system of balancing? Or just do what you want, right? That doesn't resonate with an obliger.
Yeah.
What would resonate with an obliger is to say something like, well, if you say yes to one, you have to say no to the other. So you have to say no to one of them so you can say yes to one of them. So either way, you can only say yes to one. So that's, or you could say some obligers, not all, but some, this is advanced, can feel an accountability to their future selves. So you'd say, well, right now you feel like you want to like run around all day and try to see both of them, but your future self is really going to feel bad about that choice and feel like you didn't give either one of them the right kind of time. Think about what that future self is going to want to need. Or you could appeal to like some other thing, like, don't you want to model good behavior for other people? Like if, like maybe other members of your family see that you're just like running around and not using your time well. You want to model good behavior for other people and show other people, how you can do this. Like in the workplace, you could say, like to somebody who at work is like working all the time, you could say, you're not setting a good example for your team. If you work till 9, if you work on the weekends, then everybody thinks that that's what they have to do. You have to be a good role model. You have to show people how to behave through boundaries that you're going to set on yourself. And so then it's like, well, I'm going to do it for myself because I'm really doing it through this accountability to others.
Yeah. And I think that's huge because, she would figure out a way to do both of them, but she wouldn't do either one of them completely. She'd be like going to the first one knowing that she's going to have to leave early to arrive late at the second one. And so she's really only half there in both of them. But, again, I think there would be a lot more value. Maybe it's just a communication style of saying, don't you want to give the most attention to one? And then, yes, that means you do have to say no to the other. But, one of them rightfully needs this right now and the other may not. And so really base it on that versus just saying, I'm going to figure out how to be two places at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So we've kind of got a breakdown of these four different types of decision makers. And so as we look at that now, one of the things I deal with as a trainer, and I think, anyone listening to this is going to say, how do I stay motivated? How do I get involved in a program and then just stick with it? Because I think, you would probably not have a whole lot of trouble sticking with a program once you're kind of in it and committed to it. You're going to meet your New Year's resolutions as an upholder because you made the resolution. I'm going to go to the gym at least 3 times a week. And this is what I'm going to do. You can easily set that. questioner is going to look at it a little differently. A rebel is going to look at it very differently. And then, of course, an obliger is going to have a lot of difficulty with this. And if most people are obligers and questioners, we have a large group of people that are going to kind of somewhat struggle with that whole making that commitment to be engaged and stay engaged. So what are some strategies that we can each kind of look at to say, this is the way I'm going to get myself into a health and fitness program and stick with it?
So you're right. For upholders, probably anything they try is going to work. And that's important to remember when you're evaluating any kind of program or device or whatever. For some people, it's going to work because for upholders, basically anything works. So the fact that you have some success with something doesn't really tell you very much, because upholders, any system basically works for them because that's their nature. For questioners, it's really all about justification. And so if you have some kind of program, you want to design it so that there's ample justification. Why are we asking you to do this? Okay, we're telling you to run a mile in the morning. Why a mile? Why running? Why in the morning? Like, these are all questions that need to be answered. Why are you telling me to do this? Why should I listen to you? What's your authority? All these questions have to be answered. And the
funny thing is, the way I approach setting up my training is as if I'm talking to questioners, because I as a questioner, I almost structure the conversation of saying, this is why we're doing this exercise and this is why we're doing this exercise. So before they start doing anything, they completely understand why I've done everything I'm going to do with them, so that all the questions are answered. And that's just so I need to change that a little bit.
So that's the thing that puzzles questioners, because they're like, I've given you every reason in the world to do this, so why doesn't that change your behavior? Because it's just not that compelling to other people. Just like handing over a bunch of reasons why something makes sense isn't that compelling to the other tendencies. And questioners are completely baffled by this and very frustrated. Like, what? Why are other, like, what is their problem? Like, how could you possibly, why? And I will talk to questioners who are like, oh my gosh, I wrote this book, and once everybody reads my book, the world is going to change because it's so obvious that I'm right. I'm like, that's not how the world works. It's like just justification. But here's another thing to think about for a program like this. Questioners love customization. They want things to be efficient, and they typically want to tweak things to suit themselves. So anytime you're like, this is our framework, but we want this to work for you, or like maybe you're gonna make these little adjustments, or maybe you're gonna do it in your own way, but you have to do the way that's right for you. What's gonna be the most efficient thing for you? Now, this can sometimes get questioners into trouble, because let's say you're giving an elderly questioner like a bunch of medication, and you're like, you need to take this at this time, and this at this time, and this at this time, and the questioner's like, well, it's more efficient for me to take them all in the morning. And then they do that. It's like, no, man, I got to tell you, you got to take this at this time because of this reason, and you got to take this with a meal because it causes not. You got to lay that out, because somebody might think like, well, just follow the doctor's orders, but the questioner's like, no, I came up with my own better efficient system that's customized for me. So you want to take that can be a strength, because by customizing, they'll buy into something more, and they get more out of it. But it can be, you want to like remember that they have that, that aspect of their nature. Then obligers, you want to build in accountability. If you could build it into your system by like having accountability groups as part of it. Like a lot of times that's something that if you join a program, there will be like a Facebook group, or like I have an app, the Better app, where you can just search in the App Store for like Better Gretchen Rubin. And it's all about the Four Tendencies. And so people have conversations there and ask each other questions. And then they form accountability groups, because that's, oh, do you want to get in shape? I do too. Let's form an accountability group, because they need that kind of accountability. Now, some obligers are very susceptible to feeling accountability, and even like an auto email saying like, have you gone for your run today, is going to help them feel accountable. Some obligers are only going to feel accountable to like an actual person, or like, you're going to lose $50 if you don't, exercise 3 times this week or something like that, but that's what they need. They need that sense of accountability, that sense of outer accountability. Questioners often want to tell them to like really focus on their inner motivation and the reasons for what they should do something. Doesn't work for obligers. Obligers need to figure out outer accountability. Now, rebels they can do whatever they want to do. So you want to remind rebels, this is here for you if it works for you. If you feel like you want to be more energetic, more healthy, pain-free, you don't want to spend, time huffing and puffing as you go up the stairs, if you're interested in improving your sex life, if you're interested in improving your tennis game or your golf game, if you want to see results like that, this could work for you. This is something that some people find is useful. Maybe it's not for you. Whatever you think. When you're ready in your own time, it's here. do it the way you want. And that's how rebels do it. This is what I want. This is what I choose. This is a tool that works for me. But it's interesting with like notifications, say. For obligers, notifications can be super useful. Often rebels are turned off by notification, reminders to do something like Duolingo. I've heard from a lot of rebels saying that whenever they were reminded to, do whatever they were supposed to do to learn a language, it actually made them not want to do it, even though they wanted to learn Italian or French or whatever. So they had to turn off the notifications because they were actually resisting this app. Just these like automatic notifications were stopping them. So once you know your tendency, you can kind of like tweak things. Or you could say like, oh, this program is really good for me because look at all these justifications. I need this kind of explanation. I need this kind of research-based thing. This seems authoritative to me. This is worthy of my trust and my time and my energy. Yeah, this other program, it doesn't have that. I don't trust it. It's not going to work for me because like I don't understand why they're telling me to do this stuff. It doesn't make any sense, So.
Okay, so if I'm going to kind of recap all that from the perspective of an individual to say, okay, I want to get healthy and fit. For an upholder, once they kind of make that commitment that this is an internal need, an internal want, they're pretty much on track. They're gonna pretty much stick with it. If they've given that right justification and put the right value of it in their mind, they're bought in. So they're pretty much going to come through. For a questioner, it's really about getting to the fundamentals of the why. And I keep saying this with my program. I'm talking to people and I'm like, okay, you have to define your why. And once you understand your why, now you can build a customized program that's going to get you there to that vision and the accomplishment.
That's a very questioner perspective.
Yes. And so that's how I've I've always wrapped my paradigm around. Once you kind of have your why and you have your vision, then you put that together and that's your vow. So, you know why you're in it. And anytime you feel like you want to sway or get away from it, you come back and have to, say, okay, what was my why? And is my why still there?
You can see why that's deeply frustrating to obligers because that's not compelling to them.
Now,
that's not going to help them.
Right. On the obliger side, I agree. Yeah. And a lot of times I talk to them about finding accountability and getting engaged because I do know that matters as well. But for most people, interestingly enough, their why is not themselves. It's someone else.
Yeah. So that's a kind of outer accountability. Yes. Yeah. Interesting. So I guess it's sort of a question of how you frame it because is the why like because research shows that people who exercise at least 3 hours a day tend to live 10 years longer and be pain-free, or is the why because my family's counting on me and I want to be there for my
I want to be there for my grandchildren and and be that super grandma that I remember my grandma being, that kind of thing.
Well, like I remember years ago, like before I was born, my father was a cigarette smoker. He's a questioner. And so the way he got himself to quit smoking was he calculated how much money he spent each week on cigarettes and then figured out if he invested it and he got like a standard rate of return, what he would get. And then over the period of 10 years, how much money he'd have. And like whenever he felt like smoking, he would just like run these numbers. And for him, it was like, oh my gosh, it's so efficient. Look at this money I'm saving. Oh my gosh, cost benefit analysis. That was questioner. Another friend of mine quit smoking. It was like smoked his whole life, couldn't quit. The minute his son was born, he's like, I'm quitting. I can't do this. I'm a parent. I have a son. I have to be healthy. I have to be around. I can't model this behavior. I can't expose my son to the secondhand smoke. And he just quit overnight after not having been able to quit for, 15 years. Yeah. So it's same behavior, but coming from different places. Yeah.
And then with the rebel, I guess they just have to recognize that they're not always going to feel it and not always want it, but in the end, if they, want to stick around and do things, then they'll figure out a way to make it work for themselves.
No, they always have to feel it. They always have to want it.
Okay.
Always. They have to want it. And I mean, and to me and to you, probably as questioners and upholders, this seems exhausting. I'm like, I don't want to have to want to do things in order to do them. I want to be able to do things I don't want to do. I do tons of things I don't want to do. I love that about myself. I think it's like one of the best things about being an upholder. And certainly questioners have an equal ability to do it. But for a rebel, they really want to do it. Now, sometimes they can want to do it because I want to be this kind of person. I want to be an energetic person. I want to be a vital person. I want to be a better tennis player. So I'm going to do it because that's what I want. But they are literally tapping into this idea of wanting and choosing every time. It's a matter of identity. It's a matter of choice. It's a matter of freedom. in a very deep way. And this can be hard for them to manage because it's like it's hard to want to do something. But often, and maybe you've seen this, is like one thing I've noticed with rebels is they'll often incorporate a lot of like in terms of something like exercise, it's like, oh, I'm going to go running right now because I feel like being outside and it's such a beautiful day. Or I'm going to know the schedules of 5 gyms and I'm going to exercise, but I'm going to pick today I feel like doing yoga. Today I feel like doing a spin class. Today I feel like doing this like weird Asian martial art because like, nobody's ever heard of it. I'm going to be the first one to do it. They want a lot of like choice, a lot of freedom. Like, what do I feel like doing right now? Or I know somebody who did it as a way to play hooky. I'm like, how do you get yourself to exercise regularly? He goes, I always do it in the middle of the workday when I'm supposed to be at my desk. And so for him, it was like, they can't make me stay at my desk. I'm off to take my run. Again, very rebel, right? But that's how he tweaked the rebel perspective to be like, you can't make me sit at my desk because I want to be outside. Or somebody said, somebody told him it was too dangerous to go for a run in his neighborhood. And he says, now I run every day. Somebody told me I shouldn't. I'm like, you tell me I can't? Well, what? Or like a challenge. An old guy like you could never run a 10K. Really? Watch me.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Somebody like you couldn't train. Somebody like you couldn't stick to a consistent schedule of exercising 4 times a week. I mean, I don't see you doing that. Really? Watch me.
Yeah. So now, I know you said in the book that these things sort of kind of get hardwired into us as once we kind of reach adulthood. There's no way we can really kind of change these. So the reality is we have to kind of structure our approach to the way we do things rather than try to kind of push ourselves in one direction or another.
I mean, in my observation, it's very difficult if it's even possible to change your fundamental nature. And I'm like, why try to follow that route? It's so easy to set up to change conditions, to change situations so that you can harness the strength of your tendency and offset the weaknesses and limitations. That's easy to do. I mean, that's very easy and simple. You can get exactly where you want to go just by building in the right kind of structures. And, people say they want to be something else. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, people feel like I should be this other person. I should be this. I should be that. I'm like, why should you be anything? It's like obligers. You're part of a big group. This is the biggest group of people. There's nothing wrong with you. You're the rock of the world. It's not that you lack willpower. It's not that you lack self-control. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just you need outer accountability. Well, guess what? So do a ton of other people. So just do it. It's like, why try to, psych yourself out or like get yourself into a different mental space? I feel like I don't see that being very successful. And it's certainly a tremendous amount of work and very frustrating. I'm like, why not just take the short, easy path? Because it's so easy once you just do the right thing. Or if there's somebody else who's really frustrating you, and you're like, why won't this person do XYZ thing? If you're like, well, let me think about it from the tendencies perspective, and let me think if I can change my way of communicating with that person. And maybe I can really, like, for example, with rebels, one of the things that's very striking about rebels is if you ask or remind them to do things, you ignite that spirit of resistance. And so if you're very gently and helpfully reminding your rebel to do something, you may be stopping them from doing it because they might have decided to go for a run on their own for their own reasons. But when you're like, aren't you going to exercise today? They're going to be like, no, because you're not the boss of me. You can't tell me what to do. I'm not going to meet your expectation. You might be actually getting in their way. Yeah. And several rebel teenagers have written with the exact same anecdote, which I think is hilarious, which is like they were making their bed in the morning and then their mom yells out, oh, don't forget to make your bed. And they stop midway, or they actually throw back the covers, one guy said, because it's like, I was going to make my bed when I felt like making my bed, but I'm not going to make my bed because you told me to. And the fact that you've told me to makes me stop because I don't want you to think that you're the boss of me. I'm not going to do it just because you told me to. So I'm going to stop. So you can actually interfere with a rebel with your reminders and your charts and your to-do lists and your list of phone calls. And, it's hard to grasp that. It took me a long time to really understand how rebels see things because it's so different from the way I see things in upholder.
And that's what I'm saying. Yeah, you're on an opposite pole, which again I am with my wife, and so it's like at times I'm like, look, if you don't want to do this, don't do it.
Yes, this is what Westerners say. Yes, that is it. right?
Yeah. So it
But
is communication. Yeah.
Because you're married to an obliger, let me warn you about a very common pattern among obligers. And this happens a lot with obligers. So if obligers are in a situation where they're exploited or neglected or taken advantage of or not heard, like they get assigned too many extra shifts, they get pulled onto too many committees, they're asked to do too much unpleasant travel for work, they're pulling more than their share, they're doing too much work as compared to somebody else, they can fall into deep burnout and resentment, obliger rebellion. Yeah. And obliger rebellion is when an obliger will meet an expectation, and then suddenly they just snap. And they're like, this I will not do. And sometimes it's small and symbolic, like, oh, I'm just not going to answer your emails for 10 days or so because I'm sick of you. Not such a big deal, but sometimes it can like blow up a relationship. Your most valuable employee can walk out the door and be like, there's nothing that you can do to make me stay. You might have a friend, a needy friend who's calling you every night at midnight, night after night after night. And then one day you're like, you know what? I can't take this anymore. You're dead to me. And then just end that relationship. And it's meant to be helpful. It often is helpful. It's like the emergency parachute that gets an obliger out of a situation that's become unsupportable. The weight of expectations has become too high. And so in order to get out of it, this obliger rebellion is like the ripcord. Obligers often talk about it as exploding, boiling over. It's not a controlled, let me explain to you why this isn't working for me. This is like an explosion. They will often say, I'm acting out of character. People didn't understand, like, there's no kind of warning. So the people around them are like, what the heck just happened? Like, you never told me that you did. I mean, I did this as an upholder. Like, I was emailing an obliger over the weekend because I'm like, if you don't want to answer emails over the weekend, don't. Like, it's up to you. You do whatever you want. Set your own boundaries. But I'm just like, if something occurs to me, I'll mail it to you. As an upholder, I'm like, I wouldn't check my emails if I didn't want to. But I'm realizing, oh, this obliger thinks that I'm really, really intrusive and expecting her to answer all these emails over the weekend. I got to stop. So, man, I learned how to use delay delivery in Outlook because I didn't understand. And she wasn't like, hey, you know what? I really wish you didn't say. She didn't say anything. I had to figure it out kind of through devious means that I was really overstepping what she thought was an appropriate level of expectation. And it never occurred to me. It literally never crossed my mind even to consider whether I should or shouldn't do it. I didn't even decide it was okay. It never crossed my mind to even question it. But so this is what you want, if you are an obliger or you're around an obliger, you want to be very aware of the possibility that they could go into this place of deep burnout and resentment.
Well, I actually have an example of that. We had bought we bought a condo on the beach, and so because of some of the things that were going on, I was like, it's really important for one of us to be on the HOA committee, and since you have more available time and you're here at the condo more, I think it should be you.
Very efficient. That seems like makes a good argument.
So she agrees to do it, and she's going to the meetings, and she's hating every minute of it, the politics of it, the push and pull of it, and like you said, there was just this blow up, and I was
so what happened?
Well, I said, okay, I said, I completely understand. It's very political. It's very difficult. I said, when it rolls around to the next election, it's probably going to be better for me to be on it. Because, again, just the expression that I was getting from her was that, okay, maybe she wasn't the best choice at this point in time. It's just too much. And so
what form did that take in the moment? Describe what that looked like.
She was just very frustrated. She would go to the meetings and she'd come back just angry at me, at everything, at the world. And I'd be like, okay, I know, I don't think I did anything. I know you're a little frustrated from this meeting, but this is almost too emotional relative to what we were talking about. And so I just thought, okay, there's too much emotion here.
Yes.
And then at that point, I'm like, it's not that I don't trust the decisions she would make or the things she would say at the meeting. I'm just kind of like, well, if there's emotion there, I need her to be able to ratchet that back. And maybe she's just not ready to do that right now. And maybe it's just better for our relationship and everything else and maybe more efficient if I'm doing it, because then I can internalize that and say, okay, well, they're not mad at me. They're mad at the situation, or they're yelling, or they're doing whatever they're doing. I can deal with that. I deal with that all the time. So, for me, it was just, I recognized that was going to be something that was not conducive to us having a good relationship. So it changed my math on why, maybe it wasn't a good thing for her to stay on that committee, and maybe I could just take it over.
And that's the thing, is you want to be listening very hard for anything that is starting to sound like burnout or resentment is coming in. And I think really if you're wise and you're around an obliger, you really are looking out prospectively for this. And there's a great example. A friend of mine started like a finance company, and he had somebody who worked for him who was like one of his star performers. This guy was so good at his job. And as a consequence, because he was such a great contributor, he got pulled onto a lot of teams because everybody wanted him on their team because he made everybody look good. And so at the annual review, my friend, his boss, said, "You're doing too much work too well." And I mean that as a sincere criticism. And he took him off a couple of the committees, because a couple of the teams, because he's like, "You're going to burn out, and then you're going to quit. And then I'm going to lose my most valuable employee. I can't let you get to that point. I'm going to look at this and say, there's no way somebody can be doing all this work. Like, something's going to give. So I'm going to step in and say, this is too much. I'm going to help you cut some things out. Or like, you haven't taken a vacation in 18 months. By Friday, I want you to come and tell me when you're going to take at least a week's vacation because you've been working too hard without a break. I'm going to help you. I'm going to give you the outer accountability that you need to take that break, because the anger will build, the resentment will build, and then we're going to have this explosion that's not going to be good for anybody.
And that's such a powerful example of how the value of this book and understanding these tendencies. And again, you put in there how to deal with someone that is that type of person. So when you start getting that fundamental kind of understanding of who you are and who they are, it helps you kind of set yourself up for success, and it helps you set up others for success in your relationships with them. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity to read this book. It's called The Four Tendencies. So Gretchen, if I were to try to introduce someone to you, send them somewhere you would like for me to send them, beyond the quiz, which is at happycast.com. happyercast.com/quiz. Where else would you like for me to send folks?
So I have a website where I have all kinds of resources, and I post just about every day about kind of my adventures in happiness and good habits, human nature, the Four Tendencies, and that's GretchenRubin.com. I also have a podcast that I do with my sister. My sister's an obliger, so we come from different places, and that's Happier with Gretchen Rubin. I'm all over like Twitter and Facebook, Instagram as Gretchen Rubin. I love hearing from listeners and readers and viewers. So if you have insights and observations, I would love to hear them. If you want to go deeper into the Four Tendencies and kind of pair, and like maybe you want to like ask people of your tendency, like what's going on with everybody else, or you're like a parent who's frustrated, they don't know how to deal with a child, or you're a healthcare professional who doesn't know, wants insights about how to deal with certain class of patients or a certain kind of challenge. There's all kinds of discussions there, and you can set up accountability groups. And there's tons of obligers who are looking for ways to set up, kind of convenient and free. This is a free app, free ways to form accountability groups for whether it's, writing your PhD thesis or training for a marathon or just sticking to an exercise plan or quitting sugar or relaxing more. Obligers need to have outer accountability for taking the day off. And so there are groups where it's like, hey, did you spend that 2 hours reading on the couch the way you said you were going to? So there's all different ways. And then of course the book, The Four Tendencies, goes into all of this, much more systematically as to how the four tendencies play out and how they interact with each other.
Yeah. And so we will have all of the links to that you've mentioned at our show notes, which this is episode 275. So you can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/275, and I'll be sure to have all the links there. So again, Gretchen, thank you so much for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness.
Oh, thank you. I so enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. If you enjoyed today's episode, would you please do me a favor? Go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/review, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on iTunes. It really does help get this word out, helps people find the podcast, lets them know what's there. So go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/review and leave an iTunes review today. Thank you. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet Dr. Robin Miller and discuss her book, Healed. Until then, have a happy and healthy week.